Hey everybody, this is Brenton Brown, owner of Forza Tuning and Performance, and today we're going to talk about the famous Lamborghini Countach. Lamborghini was a relatively new company that produced a couple cars, and prior to this model they had a car called the Miura, which you might be familiar with. It was a very beautiful car, but not nearly aggressive styled as this. So Lamborghini knew that they needed a new car. They needed something to replace the Miura, and so they started the project called LP400. And that would later become the Koon-Tosh that you see here today. Lamborghini commissioned Marcello Gandini of the Bertone Design Studio in Italy to design the body of the car. Gandini was a younger, less experienced designer at the time, but he had some very progressive design ideas. He had done a couple concept cars in the late 80s with this wedge-shaped design and the scissor doors, but none of those cars went to production. When Lamborghini asked Bertone to design the body of this car, Gandini is the one responsible for the scissor doors and this crazy wedge-shaped design that was unheard of at the time. So shortly before the 1971 Geneva Auto Show, which was where this Koon-Tosh was supposed to debut, Lamborghini sent the chassis of the car to Bertone's studio to have the bodywork and the interior installed. So once it went there, Bertone was the one responsible for putting the body on the car, the interior, and this radical styling that you see. At this time, the Koon-Tosh still didn't have a name. It was still referred to as the LP112 project. Now they were getting very close to having to debut this car. Traditionally, all Lamborghini models are named after famous fighting bulls, because Lamborghini's founder, Ferruccio Lamborghini's astrological sign was a Taurus. One of the designers on the team, he spoke no Italian. He was from an area of very northern Italy called Piedmont, and he spoke Piedmontese, and that's the only language that he knew. And the word Koon-Tosh he would constantly refer to during the project because it meant astonishment. Right before this car is supposed to come out, they don't have a name for it, and one of the designers just jokingly said, let's just call it the Koon-Tosh. And it stuck, and the rest is history. So the 1971 Geneva Auto Show rolls around, the concept car called LP112 that now had a name called the Koon-Tosh debuts. It got a lot of press coverage. Reporters were going crazy. Nobody had ever seen a car remotely look like this. The Lamborghini literally wasn't like anything that had ever come before. It was a rear mid-engine car, which today we have a lot of, but at the time it was basically unheard of. The famous doors, the classic wedge-shaped design, the styling was just radical. It got a lot of coverage, and Lamborghini decided to go ahead and put the car into production. The original car was just a concept car, so it had not gone through anything like crash testing or anything like that to be mandated to be a legal production car. Lamborghini decided to move forward and make it a production car, and the original concept car, they put through crash testing, which sadly destroyed the car, but they had to test to get it approved. And it passed with flying colors. It actually held up really well in crash test. And so Lamborghini began the process of making the production car. It wasn't until 1974 that Lamborghini actually released the Koon-Tosh to the public. It took about 3 years to go through that process. They made this car for a long time. The Koon-Tosh was made from 1974 all the way to 1990. It spanned for 16 years. During that time, the 16 years, the car went through about 6 different progressions. They changed engines and styling and stuff, to the point where almost like this car, which is a 1989, it doesn't even really look that much like the original Koon-Tosh. During the 16 years that they produced the Koon-Tosh, there was only about 2,000 cars made, which I know sounds extremely low, but you have to remember at the time, every one of these cars was hand-built. And the majority of that 2,000 cars was really made in the last 3 years of production. That kind of tells you how few cars were actually made and how rare these cars actually are. So what we have here is a 25th anniversary Lamborghini. So in 1988, that marked Lamborghini's 25th anniversary as a car manufacturer. They wanted to do something really special, so they did a restyling of the Koon-Tosh. These cars, this is in '89, so they made the 25th anniversary Koon-Tosh from 1988 through 1990, which is the last year for production. When they went about going, to restyle the car, they actually had Horacio Pagani do all the restyling for the car. He actually helped them make this crazy, the most aggressive, wild-looking Koon-Tosh that was ever produced. I mentioned earlier that the majority of the Koon-Toshes were made in the last 3 years of production. So they made the 25th anniversary edition from 1988 to 1990, and during that time they made about 680 cars. The numbers are a little conflicting, but so you can see 680 was made in the last 3 years out of the 2,000 made in 16 years. The 1988 through 90 cars were the most powerful. They were the most fastest Koon-Tosh. They went through a few different engines, but the anniversary edition cars have a 5.2 liter V12 engine. It produces about 450 horsepower, 370 foot-pounds of torque. By today's standards, it's still good, but at the time, typical sports cars would have around 200 to 240 horsepower. So this Lamborghini was almost double of any of the other sports cars on the market. Top speed on this car was about 183 miles an hour and did a 0 to 60 time of about 4.7 seconds. So again, nothing crazy about today's standards, but you have to think in the late 80s that this was insane. This was like a race car that was street legal at the time. The Koon-Tosh weighs about 3,500 pounds and it's made of a multi-tubular space frame that's underneath the body. It's incredibly stiff, it's incredibly strong, handled very well. It features about 50-50 weight distribution. The car features a manual 5-speed transmission with a reverse lockout. Things are, very ahead of its time, when this car was produced. The car in general is such an aggressive, crazy car. I think just the added craziness on top of it makes it one of the coolest Koon-Toshes ever produced. You'll see these Koon-Toshes with this bumper and without, and what this is this is actually the US spec bumper. So for this car to be legal in America, they had to put this bumper on there. A lot of times it's popular for people to remove this and put the European bumper, which is a little bit more sleek. This bumper, a lot of people, don't really like it aesthetically. It has these large pieces right here. Personally, I like the European bumper better, but this is era correct, and this would have been the bumper that it came with for sale in the United States. So the front compartment, this is where they keep the spare tire and stuff. The battery's kept under the front. The light configuration, this is a car from the 80s, so of course it had the pop-up headlights. And the lights that you see right here, these are the parking and turn signal lights. Something very different about a Lamborghini that is really you don't see on any other car that I know of is every piece of glass is a perfectly flat plane. So almost every other car, especially the windshield, there would be some curvature to it. But the Lamborghini is almost entirely a completely flat panels, including the glass. It has a very large windshield wiper. It's got a one windshield wiper. It's actually comprised of two separate blades. And one funny thing about it is if you ever drive one of these, the windshield wiper only goes up directly in your line of sight. So if you are stuck out in the rain in this car, your right eye has a clear view of vision and your left eye is looking through raindrops. I'm not exactly sure why Lamborghini did this. Maybe they didn't intend on the car being driven in the rain very much, but it's kind of annoying and kind of funny at the same time. Okay, so we talked about the crazy flat glass. So while we're talking about the glass, let me go over here. And of course we got the scissor doors, and I'll show you. So obviously Lamborghini is famous for these doors. And how you open it, there's just a silver button right here protruding. And this is also the door lock. You just push this up, just guide the door straight up. And it's on a lift strut, so it stays up pretty good. The window in this car, the side window, you can see it's comprised of 3 different panes of glass. Originally, when they were designing this car, it went considerably faster than any other thing that they had, any other production vehicle at the time. And during testing under high speeds, it would actually suck the glass out of the car. So obviously they couldn't have that. So what they did is they made the window comprised of 3 different panes with this metal channel. So this glass and this glass are fixed. They do not roll down. And so you have this small portion right here. And what's even more comical is the door is shaped in such a manner that this window only rolls down a few inches. The bottom of the glass, the door is at such a curvature that the bottom of the glass can only come down a little bit where it would hit the inside of the door. So it's just enough for you to barely stick your hand through the glass. Obviously that could be a safety concern if the car was ever in a wreck. So what Lamborghini did was they give you a hammer underneath the dash. And if you're ever in a position where you're stuck in a car, they want you to break the windshield out with the hammer and climb out through the windshield. Okay, so another thing, I'm not very tall. I'm probably about 5'8", and you can see that this car is extremely low to the ground. That was another, crazy design feature. So all these vents are functional. On the anniversary edition car, they tried to make it over the top. The vent stuff is very, very aggressive, and I think a lot of it was cosmetic at this point. So all these work. These go to the radiators. This is an air inlet. This is actually where we put gas in the vehicle. The first version of the Koon-Tosh that came out, we're talking mid-70s here. So tire technology is not what it is today. Even a sports car at the time came with very skinny tires, almost like a regular non-sports car would have. When Lamborghini introduced the second progression of the Koon-Tosh, they commissioned Pirelli to make a very drastic, extremely aggressive wide tire. And Pirelli came through with a tire called the P0. It was a 345/35/15. So this is a 15-inch rim. It went over really popular. Lamborghini kept that tire all the way through the end of production. And this car right here features the original P0 tires. These tires are very hard to find and very expensive today. So I'll show you the back of the car. The wing didn't come on the original Koon-Tosh versions. This was added later. This wing is obviously very aggressive styling, and it did provide the car with some downforce, but the car sacrificed some top speed. So at high speeds, this car would lose about 10 miles an hour with this wing on. Despite that, most people, the styling of the wing was very, very popular, and almost everybody opted to add the wing. The original Countachs did not have license plate lights. They weren't mandated at the time. As the years progressed, it was mandatory to have license plate lights on a car, and traditionally on most cars you would have a license plate light under a bumper or something like that, but there's nothing really here to put it on. So Lamborghini took a pair of license plate lights and they flipped them upside down and put them in the bumper to shine up on the license plate. You'll see the 25th anniversary badge, of course, Lamborghini's famous bull, and then the Lamborghini insignia on the trunk. The prototype car that was in the 1971 Geneva Auto Show had some very futuristic taillights at the time. A lot of people really loved those lights, but they weren't able to use the lights in the production vehicle just from regulations or whatnot, so they had to go opt for a lot more traditional taillight design, and it kind of stuck with the car for years. So you basically see a very similar look in the taillights throughout the production years. So after the Koon-Tosh, Lamborghini came out with the Diablo, and every single Lamborghini since the Koon-Tosh, the trunk was in the front of the car. So the Koon-Tosh is a little bit different. It actually has a trunk in the back of the car behind the engine. It's actually pretty spacious for what it is. You can fit a decent amount of stuff in here. You know, it's obviously not a daily driver, not something you're gonna take on vacation. So it's fairly well. It does get incredibly warm back here, so you know, if you put groceries in here and you want to take your Koon-Tosh to the grocery store, you could surely melt a gallon of ice cream within a few minutes back here. So probably not the best car to take. The back window in the Koon-Tosh, it's basically not usable. It is so small, and the rear engine cover comes up so high that you literally can't see anything out of the back of the car. Now, originally, the Koon-Tosh, the rear cover was much flatter. And although it was a very small window, you did have a little bit of visibility out of that. But as they made changes to the engines in the car, for a while they had carburetors mounted, and they moved them from the side of the engine to the top of the engine. They had to redesign the cover. Design changes like that, they kept having to raise it up to get more clearance. And with the 25th anniversary edition being the most aggressive, this car has the least back window visibility out of any Koon-Tosh ever made. So what do you want to do when you want to pass somebody in a Koon-Tosh? You put your turn signal on and you go faster than everybody else because you are driving a Lamborghini. The rear cover to expose the engine cover is real easy. Right here there's two chrome latches. One of them releases the hood and one of them releases the trunk. Of course they're not labeled, so you just have to figure out which one is which. And you simply open it up to expose the engine, and then the trunk that we showed you earlier. So I mentioned earlier that the wing on the car was added later on. So you'll see that with the wing installed on the car, you cannot lower the engine cover with the trunk open, or it will hit the wing. So you have to put the trunk down first. Here you'll see the final version of the Koon-Tosh Lamborghini V12. It features the Bosch CIS ignition, so they've eliminated the carburetors at this point. This, like we mentioned earlier, this was the most powerful version of the engine. So the Koon-Tosh does feature some creature comforts. It does have power electric mirrors, power seats, power windows, power door locks. The Koon-Tosh has no glove compartment. Where the glove compartment would typically be located in a car, on a Lamborghini, that's where the fuses are for the car. So they gave you some space to put some stuff. If you look right here, there's a little compartment that opens up. This is where your power seat buttons are. There's 3 for each seat. And they give you a little storage compartment. It's not much. You could probably put like maybe a pair of sunglasses in there or something. There's also a little additional storage area in between the 2 seats back here on the back. So the power window switches are located in the center console. They are a little bit strange in the fact that when you push the button down, the window goes up, and vice versa, almost as if they mounted the switches in there upside down. I don't know, just a quirk for a Koon-Tosh. It also features, of course, an ashtray and a center console. The car also features sun visors, of course. The windshield is at such an aggressive angle, and the roof line is so low that when you put the sun visor down, it literally obstructs your entire view forward out of the windshield, so you can see nothing at all. Passenger sun visor has a mirror, but it actually has a mirror that you take out of the sun visor and you can use and carry around or do whatever, and then you slide it back up in a leather pouch. The car is not spacious, but it's not horrible. You can probably 6'3", 6'4" would be the maximum height that you could be for head clearance in the car. One area that's specifically cramped is where your feet go. If you look at the design of the car, the wheel is right here, and you're at a very cab forward position sitting in the car. So the inside of the wheel well, it goes very far inside. So you almost have to sit with your feet straight forward and off to the right a little bit. And with regular tennis shoes of today, it's very hard to work the gas and the clutch without your feet hitting each other. So a lot of times people drive them with driving shoes, very narrow shoes. Not ideal for a daily driver, but it's just kind of what a Koon-Tosh is. Another quirky feature on this car, that even though this car was produced for the United States, the speedometer is primarily in kilometers per hour. On the inside of the gauge, it has miles per hour, but it's very, very small. And also the odometer on the car reads in kilometers instead of miles. You typically see a large discrepancies in mileage on these cars today. You know, during the years when you went in to register the vehicle or emissions testing, if somebody didn't know what they were doing, they would write it down, the kilometers as miles. So a lot of times you can see some very conflicting mileage reports on these cars. It kind of like makes it seem like somebody rolled the odometer back, even though in a lot of cases it did not. Speaking of the speedometer in a Koon-Tosh actually runs off a speedometer cable that is driven off the front left wheel. It leads for a rather shaky speedometer needle while driving, but literally this front wheel is the only thing that turns the speedometer. The engine is rather loud in the Koon-Tosh. It obviously sounds very good as part of the driving experience. But the Koon-Tosh did come standard with an Alpine tape deck in every car, which this car features. Italians cars typically have a very odd sounding horn, and this car is no different. This car is like the epitome of aggressive, strong styling. It's got a bull on it. It's got a ridiculous amount of power for the era, and it has a horn that would be something I guess you'd hear on a clown car. I'll show you. And unlike most cars where the horn would be on the steering wheel, on the Koon-Tosh they decided to put it on the turn signal lever. So I'm not sure what the point of that was, but I'll let you hear it. And yes, that is actually the horn that came on the car. That is not an aftermarket clown horn. The Koon-Tosh has a very functional air conditioning system, which is pretty much a necessity since obviously the windows barely roll down in the car. You can toggle between Celsius and Fahrenheit with the push of a button, so they did give you that feature. The blower motor in the car, sometimes we get cars in and people are like, you know, the fan stays on all the time. You know, there's always air coming out of the vents. Lamborghini did that on purpose. The windshield and the cabin design of the car, if the blower motor does not turn, the windshield will fog up almost instantaneously despite the weather conditions outside. So the fan comes on every time you turn the key for it, and it remains on. And then on top of that, it has some additional blower motor settings, kind of like low, medium, high, like you'd have on a normal car. So we mentioned earlier that the Lamborghini has a 5-speed manual transmission. It comes with a dog box transmission, which means where first gear would normally be, which is up and to the left, that's where reverse gear is. Where second gear would normally be down and to the left, that's where first gear is on the Koon-Tosh. What Lamborghini did is they put a reverse lockout switch. And so what that's to do is it just simply switches over and blocks out reverse. So if you're shifting, it prevents the car from accidentally being shifted into reverse when you want to go to first. So if you want to go into reverse, you simply switch over the reverse lockout, put the car up into gear, and then when you remove it from reverse, you just switch the lockout back. So that's kind of a cool feature. So this is the Lamborghini Countach. This car has literally reshaped what everybody's idea of a sports car or an exotic car would be or would look like all the way until present day. A lot of manufacturers have taken design cues off this car and incorporated it into new cars, and you can kind of see very similar features or shapes and stuff, even cars of today. So this is, in my opinion, this is probably one of the most iconic sports cars of all time, and personally one of my favorites. So if you like this video and you want to see more, make sure you like and subscribe. I want to talk for a second I get asked a lot, how did I get into cars? What sparked my interest from cars? How did I get the name Exotic Car Doc? And it all boils down to basically this specific car. You know, I grew up during the 80s, and this car was such an iconic car. Everybody had a poster of it on their wall in their garage. It was the most radical, extreme car at the time. You know, it all started with this car. When I was a kid, I was infatuated with the Lamborghini. I would read every magazine that there was anything about a Lamborghini, if it was on the cover. And I collected these toys called micro machines that were popular in the 80s. And I don't have any of my toys from my childhood, except I still have my micro machines to this day. And the particular micro machine that I'm holding in my hand right here is of a white Lamborghini Countach. And out of all the cars, this was literally my favorite one. I would carry this around everywhere I went. I would tell my dad, my uncle, and my grandpa, you know, when I grow up, I'm going to have a Lamborghini, and they would laugh, of course, you know, but this specific car, and here we have the real version of this car. And, you know, years later, now I've worked on these for years, and, you know, Lamborghini has always been my favorite car. I'm just very passionate